We like consoles here at Digital Foundry, of course. We like low-power handhelds as well, and both of these devices excel when games are tweaked to best suit their characteristics, right? However, when OMEN approached me about producing a sponsored video on its Transcend 14 laptop, I was genuinely intrigued at the prospect. What does a tweaked, optimized gaming experience look like on the most demanding AAA games running on a MacBook Pro-sized slim and light notebook? What kind of battery life do you get versus, say, the Asus ROG Ally? And since we're looking at a laptop with an NVIDIA RTX GPU based on the Ada Lovelace architecture, what about cutting-edge features like ray tracing, path tracing even, and frame generation? This has been a fascinating project for me to apply game optimization principles that we use on consoles and handhelds on an efficiency-orientated gaming laptop in this ultra small form factor, and I think you'll find the results very interesting. So, since this is a video brought to you by Digital Foundry and OMEN, let's kick off by looking at the OMEN Transcend 14. This is the high-end model, Intel Core Ultra 9 185H. 32 gigs of LPDDR5X 7467 Gen 4 PCIe NVMe SSD and a 14-inch 16x10 OLED display running at up to 120 Hz with a 2880 by 1800 resolution, and it supports HDR. There's no G-Sync though, meaning we'll be testing using V-Sync in some scenarios, but regardless, in terms of image quality, contrast, vibrance, this display is a peach. This kind of sub-notebook form factor, is rather like my 14-inch MacBook Pro and around the same weight, 1.6 kilos. RGB lighting on the keyboard though, that's something new and different. The OLED screen, certainly an upgrade over my Mac, as is the GPU. I've got the top-end model here, remember, and that comes with the RTX 4070 in mobile form. A 65-watt 4070, but up to 15-watt extra can be diverted from the CPU if needs be. NVIDIA calls it Dynamic Boost. 4070s with higher power draw are available, offering more performance, but with that comes a higher battery drain, generates more heat, and therefore it requires a larger form factor and bigger, often louder cooling solutions. The OMEN Transcend 14 is concentrating on efficiency and a sub-notebook design. So let's see to what extent it can game. But before we go on, you'll see that our gaming captures have borders left and right. That's because this is a 16:9 aspect ratio video, while the OMEN laptop has a 16:10 screen. So we're running all games at the same aspect ratio as the actual display you'll be getting with this device. And what you've been looking at is, well, a bunch of games really, but this is Alan Wake 2 running on the Transcend 14 at 60 frames per second using DLSS to native resolution with the equivalent otherwise to PlayStation 5's quality mode settings. So let's explain how we got there. So this is Alan Wake 2's quality mode in a known stress test area on PlayStation 5. You've seen it in our content before. We're getting a 4K output here reconstructed from around 1270p using the same settings but tailored to the Transcend 14's 2880 by 1800 screen, and tapping into DLSS spatial upscaling gives us very similar results to PS5, just at a different resolution. You can see something similar here in A Plague Tale Requiem. The PS5's outputting 4K reconstructed from 1440p, but targeting the screen resolution of the laptop and leaning into DLSS delivers higher frame rates no matter which DLSS settings you're using. So that's the key really, right? Optimized settings, best bang for the buck, leaning into RTX technologies like DLSS, and also accepting that quality thresholds change according to the display. This is most keenly felt on PC handhelds, where you can take plenty of liberties with resolution, but it applies here too. A 14-inch high DPI display like this is great, but you shouldn't be afraid of using higher upscaling factors with DLSS compared to a larger desktop screen. It can still look really impressive, especially with an OLED display like this one. But first up, let's talk efficiency and battery life, which I measured using this scene from A Plague Tale Requiem, with all devices setting their screens to max brightness. I'm using a frame rate cap in all cases to prolong battery life and also to keep power draw in check. Batteries only have so much power to offer at any given point, and absolutely maxing performance with unlocked frame rates and the like can see performance actually reduced when it's unplugged from the mains, which we don't really want to see in a battery life test. On matching settings, 1080p with balanced upscaling on low settings, the OMEN 14 outpaces both ROG Ally and Lenovo Legion Go. Only handhelds with similarly sized batteries to the OMEN Transcend 14 beat it. Impressive, bearing in mind we're comparing integrated graphics at 25 watts on smaller screens up against a machine which separates CPU and GPU running a much larger OLED screen. Of course, some of this efficiency is down to the fact that the workload here may be challenging to a handheld, but less so to a 65-watt discrete GPU. We can increase resolution to the native 2880 by 1800, we can use DLSS quality mode, and we can up settings to high with medium draw distance and still hit 30 FPS comfortably. And this takes battery life down to 61-62 minutes. But it's still beating the ROG Ally despite a massively increased graphics workload. I noticed absolute max system power draw from the OMEN Transcend 14 to be around 120 watts, with frame rates unlocked and ray tracing active. But here, just over an hour of battery life from a 71 watt hour battery basically means, well, average power draw around 70 watts, right? That's lower than an Xbox Series S, and that includes the OLED display too. So just like ROG Ally, you can play off battery, but for extended play on demanding games where you're weapons free on settings, mains is the way to go. And if you take the approach of shifting image quality expectations with a smaller screen in mind, along with console style optimized settings, it's possible to get some very impressive results for mobile kit. But here's the thing, sometimes great results just happen without much effort being put into settings tweaks. I mean, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora is a tech powerhouse, right? Extremely rich in detail and heavily leaning into ray tracing. Consoles have a 30 FPS quality mode, a slightly simplified version of PC's high setting. But with the OMEN Transcend 14, I found that the vast majority of my gameplay ran at the same 30 frames per second at full resolution 2880 by 1800 with DLSS balance mode, and it does it on ultra settings. The game includes VSync options that cleanly divide from the panel's native refresh rate, giving you consistent frame times, and it looks phenomenal. You can find occasional areas of gameplay that drop into the high 20s, but moving to high settings sorts that out. Or you can simply do what I'm doing here and drop the ranges of the object detail and extra streaming detail options down from ultra to high equivalents. Everything else stays on ultra. 30 frames per second. Consistent gameplay is pretty great. So it's simplicity itself to make your own version of a console-style quality mode on the OMEN Transcend 14. But a 60 frames per second performance mode is trickier, as the PC version of the game lacks dynamic resolution scaling, which is used heavily on PS5. Which is to say that rather than drop frame rate, Avatar drops resolution instead. However, by matching the PS5's performance mode settings and dropping down to 1920 by 1200 with DLSS balance mode, you can achieve similar effects. Smoother performance tends to favour first-person games like this one, but I really did enjoy the sumptuous visuals of the 30 FPS version too. Horses for courses then. To put this all into perspective, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora was our pick for the best gaming graphics of 2023, and here it is playing out on a laptop with a 65-watt mobile GPU with ray tracing on. Runner-up to Avatar in our best graphics of 2023 was Alan Wake 2, and I spent a good degree of time on this one because the PC version can, of course, mirror what the PlayStation 5 does settings-wise, but it can also offer more thanks to its ray tracing feature set, path traced lighting being the major draw. Sounds rather ambitious for a 65-watt mobile processor, dynamic boost or not, but here it is at 1200p resolution using DLSS balance mode, but with all RT settings active, albeit at their low settings. But go back to Alex's Alan Wake 2 coverage and you'll see that low RT settings were our chosen sweet spot for visual bang for the buck. 30 FPS is the natural point here for this extreme load, but the game doesn't actually have an inbuilt frame rate cap. I'm using Chaldean's Special K to get the job done here. So yes, path trace lighting, DLSS ray reconstruction, all of those features can be used on less power hungry RTX hardware. Turns out that ray tracing, like many graphical features, is highly scalable. Of course, if you'd prefer to trade features for resolution, you saw earlier on in the video that even at Alan Wake 2's biggest stress points, the Transcend 14 configured for PS5 equivalent quality mode settings can deliver equivalent performance to the console. DLSS upscaling and a 2880 by 1800 resolution target combined to make this possible. So it stands to reason that a 30 FPS quality mode, just like PlayStation 5, is possible. However, using DLSS performance mode at this 1800p resolution or the similar 1600p, and then kicking in NVIDIA DLSS 3 frame generation gives you something consoles cannot. Quality mode settings delivered at 60 frames per second. Higher actually, I'm using a control panel VSync to make this footage. NVIDIA typically doesn't recommend this, but I was surprised to see that it works and with no real issues. Latency still fine, and Alan Wake 2 really looks the part here. It's running on a laptop, it's quite remarkable to see on that OLED screen. And just to remind you here, the 65 watt 4070 is running on the equivalent of PlayStation 5's quality mode settings, typically PC's medium. All told, it's the way I'd play this game on the OMEN Transcend 14. A quick diversion now across to Unreal Engine 5 for Epic's Fortnite. Settings here are as close to consoles as we can get, PlayStation 5 settings that is, essentially a mixture of high and epic. But as usual, we're swapping out the software-based upscaling used in the game for NVIDIA DLSS, pegged to performance mode at the Transcend 14 panel's native resolution of 2880 by 1800. Lumen, Nanite, Virtual Shadow Maps, all of the Unreal Engine 5 next-gen features, all running at 60 frames per second, just like the PS5 on the 65 watt RTX 4070. Next up, let's take on PlayStation 5 on what you might call home turf with Horizon Forbidden West. Really tough challenge this, bearing in mind how closely developer Guerrilla Games targets PS5's GPU, and only PS5, with the Burning Shores DLC content we're featuring here. Porting specialist Nixis shared with us PC's equivalent settings for PlayStation 5, and this is our take on the 30 FPS quality mode, the only caveat being a reduction to medium texture settings for the 8 gigs of VRAM on the mobile 4070 when used at high resolution. Quality mode on the console is native 4K with dynamic resolution scaling, but we're using DRS with DLSS for anti-aliasing. Again, targeting the 2880 by 1800 panel. And once again, I've got to say, I think it looks great. This is essentially a console-like experience running on a sub-notebook. 60 FPS, what's surprising here is that similar to Alan Wake, using DLSS performance mode, along with DLSS 3 frame generation, gives a pretty compelling experience, capping frame rate and preventing tearing with control panel VSync. There's been a lot of frenzied discussion about the utilization of frame generation on RTX cards lower down the stack, but used judiciously, there can be dramatic results. Frame gen to 60 FPS isn't typically the best use case scenario for the technology, but there are instances where I think it actually works out just fine, particularly if you're looking at this viewed through the lens of a mobile-orientated experience, where it's generally accepted that you'll be taking any frame rate win where you can. Even so, I still think it looks really impressive. And we haven't had to compromise quality settings. And with that in mind, let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077 and the Phantom Liberty expansion, where we'll try to pull together everything we've done so far and push further. First things first, in the Phantom Liberty expansion, we've often used this scene here to illustrate PS5 quality mode hitting GPU limits. It's got ray traced local shadows, but that's the extent of the ray tracing in this mode. Even so, PlayStation 5 targets an 1800p output, upscaling with FSR2 from 1440p. Now I've matched the settings precisely here, as close as we can get them with the OMEN Transcend 14, targeting the 2880 by 1800 of the OMEN's display with DLSS quality, balanced and performance mode in turn. And we're ahead of PlayStation 5 in all variations. Engage DLSS 3 frame generation and you'll see that in DLSS balanced and performance modes, we're now at 60 frames per second or higher, which, sorts out our quality and performance mode variants based on console equivalent settings. But I wanted to push further since there's so many more RT features in Cyberpunk, up to and including path-traced lighting. Achieving this on a 65W 4070 is going to be tricky, bearing in mind this feature is typically recommended for much higher end RTX desktop cards. But remember that our target display is smaller and more pixel dense, meaning we can use higher upscaling factors. There's also the Optimised PT mod on Nexus Mods that pairs back ray bounces to save GPU resources. And of course, we have optimized settings. You see, RT Overdrive, that isn't just path tracing, it's everything maxed. And what we've done here is actually combine PS5's quality mode equivalent settings, but with path tracing enabled. So in effect, optimized path tracing on top of optimized settings. And we're doing it at the same target 30 FPS as PS5's quality mode. Output resolution, the OMEN Transcend 14's 2880 by 1800 native resolution, though we're relying on DLSS ultra performance mode and ray reconstruction to do a lot of heavy lifting, but I think it works when you actually see it playing out on that mobile screen. The stress point in the Phantom Liberty market, where PlayStation 5 buckles under 30 FPS, well, we're still at our 30 FPS limit with our optimized path tracing setup. And how about the classic Cherry Blossom marketplace in the base game, a celebrated GPU-intensive area in Cyberpunk? 30 FPS. There's no problem with our streaming test that we use in our GPU reviews either. It's a bit of a treat to see this playing out on the laptop display, an OLED no less, remember. And yes, 60 FPS with DLSS 3 frame generation. It is doable, believe it or not. We need to switch to 1920 by 1200 resolution, but we're increasing DLSS spatial upscaling quality from ultra performance, which we used at the much higher resolution, to balanced here. And this is the classic Cyberpunk benchmark sequence running with frame generation disabled and enabled side by side. FrameGen brings us north of 60 frames per second, and so it is in the Streaming City benchmark we used too, again with dusk adjusted time of day lighting. Good stuff. Forcing VSync with FrameGen the way we did in Horizon and Alan Wake 2 isn't quite as stable, but it's still perfectly playable. Just occasional single or dual frame drops. And this was the way I spent most of my time playing the game on the OMEN Transcend 14. And again, I think it's fascinating to see that this is all possible on a 65W RTX 4070. But that's the nature of graphics, and especially so with path tracing. It's highly demanding, of course, but it's inherently scalable with technologies like DLSS spatial upscaling, frame generation, and now ray reconstruction doing a massive amount of heavy lifting. And in actual fact, turning all of that technology off, you can see just how low performance is. Running out of time here possibly, but we've spent the video talking about the latest games. Let's go back in time and see how the OMEN Transcend 14 runs on one of my favourite games of its era, Control from Remedy. Now this one was state of the art, right? But it's 5 years old now. Still a classic, I'd say. This one runs at 1440p, upscaling to 4K on PlayStation 5. 30 FPS with RT reflections, 60 FPS without them. And in all cases, rasterization settings equivalent to PC at low with a dash of medium. So on the OMEN Transcend 14, 2560 by 1600 resolution with balanced DLSS, and I can run at 60 FPS all day with RT reflections, and all other settings at medium. Performance is super solid here, so we have a better looking game than the console version, and we don't need to choose between quality with ray tracing at 30 FPS or performance 60 FPS without ray tracing. Let's just go to 60 with those transformative reflections. Runs like a dream. So can a thin and light notebook with a 65W RTX GPU produce meaningful gameplay experiences? In a world where benchmarking is done at ultra settings with no upscaling, results will be impacted. It's obvious, right? But tap into technologies built around efficiency and clearly you can get impressive results. It's like having a portable console, if you like, a step above those PC handhelds, with the added benefits of more modern RTX features. So DLSS, frame generation, ray reconstruction, optimized settings. We tend to talk about them for increasing performance on desktops, But what I've tried to demonstrate here is that equally, they're enabling technologies for a different class of product aimed primarily at a much smaller form factor, built around more power efficient parts. And that sums up the OMEN Transcend 14 to a T really. But OMEN is a gaming brand, and I think I've demonstrated that this is a fully featured games machine. Once you build your settings management around optimization, efficiency, and actually targeting the display the unit ships with, I really enjoyed my time using it. So that wraps up this particular video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please do like, subscribe, share. But in the meantime, that's all from me on this one. Thanks for watching.